John?
Okay, are we ready to start? Okay, well, welcome everyone to this webinar we're having doing it on Father's Day. I think we kind of didn't realize, this is Father's Day. So, but luckily we're gonna be recording this as well, and we are recording this as well. It's a very important topic. We're talking about reparations and Juneteenth and capitalism, police, everything that Juneteenth, as you know, is Friday. And we had a very inspiring event occurred in the Bay Area with the ILWU and their shutdown, which our brother Clarence Thomas is going to talk about. And it's just so important that we're talking about these things, because whether you're talking about reparations or Juneteenth, or the role of the police as the right arm of capitalism, any of these topics are always told through the lens of the ruling class, the folks, the financial and industrial monopolies that actually run the politicians and run this country. It's their views and their ideology that gets pervade all over the media and TV and movies and everywhere. And through that lens, they talk about the necessity of reparations or the importance of Juneteenth and all of these things. So we felt it was so important to give the view of the people, the working class view, the Black liberation struggle view about these topics, and view from not only people who have thought about it, but people who are actively in the streets fighting, right now fighting actually. There's a demonstration that I myself have to get to immediately after this webinar. So it's a struggle that a lot of folks are well accustomed to knowing about, and hopefully everybody gets a lot out of this, and hopefully it helps build our movement for progress and build a people's independent movement. And so we wanted to start off with someone who's very busy, which is why we want to get him on first, Clarence Thomas. And Clarence Thomas, you know what? I did not, Clarence, I'm gonna have to wing your introduction here, because I forgot to get it on here. But Clarence Thomas was one of the leaders of the International Longshore Workers Union, and he's been a longtime activist on the ports. And if you know about the shutdowns and against the apartheid South African, and when they shut down the ports against them, the shut down the ports in solidarity with the Palestinian movement, all of these issues that Clarence Thomas was kind of the motor force of the progressive elements of the union movement, and the ILWU in particular. And so Clarence is also actively writing. He's a writer, writes articles, he's writing a book, he's doing all kinds of things right now. And Clarence, I want you to come and speak and fill in what I missed. I'm sorry.
Thank you, John. It's good to see all of you today at Father's Day. First of all, I'm a third generation retired longshore worker, member of ILWU Local 10. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Then that I cannot say that I was associated with was the anti-apartheid struggle, because that occurred 1 year before I shouldn't say the anti-apartheid struggle, but the 1984 boycott of South African cargo for 11 days took place about a year before I started working on the waterfront. But one of my mentors, Brother Leo Robinson, was very active in that. And I think it's important to mention Leo's name, because he and my father came into the industry at the same time, 1963. They became longshore workers. Brother Leo Robinson, who I consider to be one of the most important rank and file leaders of the modern era of the ILWU, a true freedom fighter. Leo Robinson, former congressman and former mayor of Oakland, Ron Dellums, and myself, we all attended the same high school, Oakland Technical High School, which just a couple of weeks ago had a racial justice rally where some 15,000 people assembled, organized by two college students here in the Bay Area. But I think more remarkable is the fact that Leo Robinson, Ron Dellums, and myself share something else in common other than being African Americans. All of our fathers were members of ILWU Local 10. It is the most radical Black trade union local in the United States of America, and that was made quite evident by the action that took place this Juneteenth, this past Friday. I am a co-founder of the Million Worker March. Brother Leo Robinson put $50,000 of his own money after our own international did not give us any money to organize the Million Worker March because they were following the dictates of the Democratic Party and the AFL-CIO. I tell people all the time, revolutionaries, we have these images of what is a revolutionary, what does he look like, you know, in racist capitalist America. Well, in my opinion, is Brother Leo Robinson. Why do I say that? He was the person who in 1976 wrote the resolution calling for the boycott of South African cargo after he witnessed via television the aftermath of the Soweto massacre in 1976. From 1976 to 1984, there was a tremendous amount of educating and agitating and organizing around that. Brother Leo Robinson and others formulated an organization called the South African Liberation Support Committee. It was the first organization made up of trade unionists supporting the anti-apartheid struggle. Brother Leo Robinson organized containers to be secured, that were secured from the employers, that contained such items as humanitarian goods, medical supplies, clothes, chewing gum, dollar bills that were sent to Africans, many of whom were part of the liberation struggle who were in Tanzania. Of course, the employers didn't know that. They just thought it was humanitarian supplies. Sending 10,000 books in a subsequent container to Zanzibar. So he not only did that, but he was also involved in providing stipends to South African liberation fighters who were here in this country underground. And all of this culminated after Leo passed away in 2013, where the South African ambassador to the United States, Ibrahim Rasool, came to ILWU Local 10 to Leo's memorial and presented posthumously to his wife, Johnny, the late Johnny Robinson, who recently passed away, his widow, with the Nelson Mandela Humanitarian Award. And also the Nelson Mandela Freedom Award was presented to ILWU along with the South African flag. So it's important to mention this for the historical record and the fact that Leo was one of the primary benefactors of the Million Worker March. The people who are responsible for initiating the Juneteenth West Coast port shutdown are people who were mentored by Brother Leo Robinson. Trent Willis, ILWU Local 10 president, he was the one that conceived of the idea of the Million Worker March. Keith Shanklin, who served as the secretary of the Million Worker March movement, he is now the president of International Longshore and Warehouse Union Local 34, the Marine Clerks. I'm retired, but I was involved. Jack Heyman, who is retired, was also involved in working as part of the Committee to Stop Police Terror and End Systemic Racism. That was actually the group that was configured to organize the events for Juneteenth. Now let's go back to Trent Willis and to Keith Shanklin. A letter was written by our international president, Brother Willie Adams, who is the first Black to serve in the capacity of the international president of our union. He wrote a letter to the governor of Minnesota, and he basically was saying that we stand in support against police murder of innocent victims, and he talked about the need for unity and the need for resolve, that sort of thing. So when we got a copy of that letter, Trent Willis then forwarded a letter to the international president, he and Keith Shanklin. And in that letter, he basically, congratulated our international president for writing such a letter, and then went on to detail some ideas as to what the union should do as a follow-up. Well, what came out of that was letters were sent up and down the coast to various locals. But Thursday before last, as many of you may have heard, longshore workers on the West Coast, on the day of the funeral of George Floyd, they laid down their tools for 9 minutes. As you know, the 8 minutes and 46 seconds, symbolic gesture of the length of time that the cop had his knee on George Floyd's neck, has been symbolized all over the world. Well, the ILWU, all 29 ports, longshore workers put their tools down for a total of 9 minutes. At the same time, the International Longshore Association, that's the union of longshore workers on the East Coast and the Gulf and the Great Lakes area, they had an hour between 12 noon and 1 o'clock. They had an hour of solidarity action where they did not work. So it was the first time that we've had, coast to coast longshore action. Local 10 made a proposal. I take that back. Local 10 told the Pacific Maritime Association, that's the group that represents all of the shippers and all of the terminal operators, companies, and stevedoring companies on the West Coast. Trent Willis wrote a letter to the head of the PMA here in the Bay Area and requested that we wanted to change our union meeting date from the 18th of June to June 19th. Every longshore union has 1 day a month to have a union meeting. And so locals have it on different days. So we requested that we wanted to have ours changed to the 19th instead of the 18th. So we notified our international president of such. And we also told him that we were interested in the whole coast changing their particular union meeting date to the same. The international president arranged for a coast-wide teleconferencing call where all of the presidents on the West Coast got on a phone call, and where there was discussion about the proposal that Brother Trent Willis and Keith Shanklin from Local 34 were proposing. And at that time, the international president reported, I was not on the call, but I was given a report. That's why I'm sharing this with you. It's important for you to know this. So what happened was the international president conveyed that the employer had come up with another date that was suitable to the bosses. That date, as I understand it, was Flag Day. And to add injury to insult to longshore workers, it was on a Sunday, which is the time and a half day, with no historical significance. That was resoundingly rejected. And I think that speaks to the solidarity and consciousness, and what many of you may not know, some of the most confident workers in the world, but some of the biggest egos are longshore workers. And I've met them from Japan and France, Longshore workers are very independent because they run the docks. Okay, so that was summarily rejected, and I think the most important thing that came out of that was the resolve of the non-Black presidents. And everybody needs to be clear about one thing. ILWU Local 10 and 34 are the only predominant African-American longshore locals on the West Coast. When you go to the Pacific Northwest, the longshore job is not considered with, it's not a job that's commonly associated with Black men, like it is here in the Bay Area. I'm a third-generation longshore worker. My maternal grandfather started working on the docks in 1944. My father started working on the docks in 1963. My uncle started in 65. My great uncle started in 65, and then I started in 1985. So Blacks began to come into the industry in the Bay Area in large numbers. I want to digress just for a quick moment because it's important to bring this into some historical context. The reason why San Francisco or ILWU Local 10 is the only predominantly African-American trade union, along with Local 34, is because during the strike in 1934, when dock workers were striking to have collective bargaining up and down the coast, the most important thing they were trying to get was a worker control hiring hall so they could end the shape up, which was very discriminatory. Black people up to that point were primarily hired on the waterfront as a result of being strike breakers. Let me be clear about something. Black people were brought in as strike breakers and then kicked to the curb when it was all over. But they kept a few on, okay, because they were good workers. But basically they were used to divide the class and used to break strikes. Bridges, who was Harry Bridges, who was an Australian immigrant, who was a Marxist, who understood the class struggle, who had worked as a seaman, and some of the most arduous and dangerous work was being a seaman during the teens and 1920s, before he became a longshoreman. So he had seen, I guess you could say, some of the worst conditions all over the world that working class people face, because the people who do the works on the ships, it's the most dangerous work, and they're treated unfairly. They don't get paid commensurate with the work that they do, and so forth and so on. Bridges realized that they could not win the strike with Black people crossing the picket line as scabs. He did something quite revolutionary. He appealed to the Black community. First of all, he appealed to the Black pastors of churches in both Oakland and San Francisco to allow him to speak, to address the congregation, making appeal to the Black community that the union would fight for their inclusion on the docks if they stood in solidarity and not cross the picket line. The Black community accepted that proposal, and Bridges made good on that promise. And as a result of that, that's the reason why Local 10 and Local 34 are the predominantly Black locals on the West Coast. Trent Willis and Keith Shanklin were able to make the case to all of the longshore presidents up and down the coast for this particular event. And they did that because African Americans represent the most oppressed and exploited sector of the multinational working class in the United States of America. And what do I base that on? I base that on the 401 years of oppression, 401 years of exploitation, 401 years of dehumanization that a human mind can imagine has happened to Black people and still continue to this day. That's the motivation for why Juneteenth happened. Now, of course, the employers changed their position about 4 days later after it was reported by the international president that their proposal had been rejected. Now, I'll just give you a little information. If the employers would not have accepted or agreed to change those respective locals' union meeting days, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn if I were to tell you that they were going to shut down anyway, because they were. The political will was there. And as Harry Bridges always said to the bosses, when Harry Bridges would come with a proposal and the employers would say, Harry, we can't accept this. How could you think of something like this? And Harry said, it wasn't my idea, it's the rank and file. I'm their boss. Even when they're wrong, they're right. That's a quote from Bridges, by the way. He understood the power of the rank and file. The rank and file unity and strength makes the leadership strong. And when there isn't rank and file unity and democratic rank and file leadership, the leadership of the ILWU is weak. So now the real work began. And so, unlike a lot of unions, the ILWU has a long history of working with community organizations, as well as with other unions. And I think that's one of the things that separates us from others. Also, it's important to point out that Local 10 has the most, I would say Local 10 has been in the vanguard of the labor movement in protesting and resisting acts of police terror. We can go back to October 23rd, 2010, when Local 10 shut down all 5 Bay Area ports for 8 hours, calling for justice for Oscar Grant and jail for killer cops. We believe that that had an impact on Johan Mesley, who is the transit cop who shot Oscar in the back while he was handcuffed. We believe that our action had something to do with that prosecution and him going to jail. It's important also to mention that a lot of unions are very reluctant to talk about the history of their unions, the unions in this country, and the role of the police as it pertains to the struggle of the working class. I was reading an article this morning, and it talks about how one of the earliest state police departments that was formulated in this country was in the state of Pennsylvania. And the reason for that police department was for the bosses, because they wanted to contain the working class that they saw as an emerging group of foreigners who were going to challenge private property and ownership. And they thought that the ruling class was too unruly. And that was the main purpose for formulating that state police department. In 1934, during the West Coast waterfront strike, there were a total of 6 people that were killed by the police, and also in some instances by vigilantes and Ku Klux Klan type groups, because they were very anti-union, very anti-Jewish, very anti-European immigrant. I'm speaking now of the Klan and these vigilante groups. In San Francisco on July 5th, 2 strikers, one was a longshore worker, one was a cook for as a merchant seaman, the Marine cooks and stewards, were shot in the back by police. And that day was called Bloody Thursday. And every July 5th, we shut down all West Coast sports for 24 hours in memory of those two fallen strikers. We understand the relationship between the police and the working class. We're very clear about this. Unfortunately, not enough of the working class, the white working class in particular, understands that relationship. And that's part of it. And I think a great deal of that has to do with ignorance and the lack of education about the class struggle here in the United States. And I think that white supremacy has been used to divide the working class. Harry Bridges always said that discrimination is a tool of the bosses. And I remind my white brothers and sisters in the ILWU for years that long before Black people were on the waterfront, there was discrimination. And they look at me with a curious look. Well, what are you talking about, Brother Thomas? Well, this is what I mean by that. I talked about the importance of a hiring hall during the 1934 strike because there was something called the shape up. Quick overview of what that was. Before longshore workers went to work, there was a boss who would pick and choose who could work that day. Some of it was based on ethnicity, some was based on nepotism, some was based on kickbacks. It was a form of discrimination. This discrimination has no end. But Bridges understand the relationship between race and class. One of the things that I pointed out on Juneteenth were the majority of the members of the audience, or what you could say the demonstrators who were a part of Juneteenth, I would say that the majority of those individuals were under 25 years of age. It was young people who were there. And I believe that it was important for people like myself who've been involved in the struggle for many, many decades to convey some facts very important to young people. One of which is that you can't have capitalism without racism. The foundations of capitalism in this country is slavery. You need to have exploitation and oppression of particular groups of people. And we see that today in US foreign policy and the way that people of color are treated. Let's take the labor movement, for example. Do you know it's more common to find Black people and people of color who are heads of Fortune 500 companies than they are to head up a union, an international union. Let's go back to Juneteenth. There was a committee that was organized that I mentioned, and that committee, the Committee to Stop Police Terror and End Systemic Racism. It was organized by ILWU Local 10 President Trent Willis and also Keith Shanklin. We had members from other ILWU locals. We had members from progressive organizations throughout the community, too numerous for me to outline. And we went to work, getting the word out. And I want to just say this. The millennials who are very adept with social media played a very important role in the turnout for this particular event. I don't know if everyone on this particular webinar has had a chance to visit our social network, Juneteenth, S as in stop, P as in police, T as in terror.com, or at Juneteenth SPT, or hashtag Juneteenth SPT. The young people did a fabulous job, fabulous job. I want to point out something that was absolutely critical for us to highlight. The issue of the police violence was obviously critical. With the escalating number of murders right before our very eyes. Rashard Brooks, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Someone described it as murder pornography. It's just outrageous. And the more you look at it, the more sickening. And that has had a great deal to do with why we have the national uprising and uprising all around the world with regards to racism and particularly police killings. The issue of ending systemic racism in all of its forms, and when you look at our flyer, you see the stop the privatization at the Port of Oakland. Many of our young people didn't understand the relationship between that particular issue and the issue of ending systemic racism and the issue of stopping police terror. And I had to explain it to them. I said, the only reason, we had several Zoom calls because of social distancing. I said, the only reason why we're on these Zoom calls dealing with the Juneteenth action is because of ILWU and ILWU Local 10s and 34. I said, if it wasn't the result of the work that they had done calling for the Juneteenth, we wouldn't even have any discussion. I said, so the Port of Oakland, which is where the ILWU Local 10 and 34 members work, is under attack because the Port of Oakland is agreeing to allow 55 acres of the port to be used by a multi-billionaire who's a major landowner in the United States, John Fisher, who owns the Oakland A's, owns the Gap, owns the Banana Republic, owns a bunch of stuff. He wants to build a 34,000 seat baseball park, 3,000 what I call skybox condominiums. He wants to build a 400-room hotel and nearly 2 million square feet of retail space at the third busiest port on the West Coast, where the only predominantly black longshore local works. When people on the left who call themselves Marxist Leninists cannot explain in fundamental language what neoliberalism is, how the issue of class and race intersect, and how a billionaire influences elected officials to do their bidding. If they can't explain that in very concrete ways, you can't be called a revolutionary. That's what I submit to you. And when we look at what the Oakland A's and the Democratic Party are attempting to do in Oakland, that's a classic example for people to understand what the ruling class is all about, how race and class intersect. Because there are 150 acres where the Oakland A's are currently located right now. It's in East Oakland. The only bastion, that's the last bastion of the black community in Oakland. It used to be West Oakland, but that's no longer the case. Why do the A's want to move to the Port of Oakland? Well, if you've been to the Port of Oakland where we work, you would find out very quickly. You see the wonderful San Francisco skyline. You're on the water. It's so beautiful. But it is a place that has been used for 125 years for maritime and industrial purposes. There are laws that say you can't build housing here, and Democrats have been making it possible to take exceptions to that law and change it. I say, if this happens, this is going to severely limit the capacity of the port. It means that the Port of Oakland will become a port of last resort. It's going to impact growers of almonds and agricultural products who send their products to Asia. The Port of Oakland is the gateway to Asia. It is the quickest destination point from Asia to the West Coast. The Port of Oakland is the economic engine, not only for the Bay Area, but for the Northern California region. And to illustrate the point, there is an organization that's been formulated called the East Oakland Stadium Alliance. And get this, it's made up of unions like the ILWU. And guess what? Our employers, maritime employers, are also a part of this group. Also, the Sierra Club, conservationists, exporters, because this is absolutely ludicrous to do this. I maintain the reason why it's happening is that this is the era of Donald Trump. Anything goes. And unfortunately, the members of the Port Commission, there is a real estate department. What they see is that, oh, the goose that lays the golden egg is obviously maritime, but we can share this. We can share this. Everything can work out, and it cannot. The violence perpetuated against Black people by the police, the violence perpetuated against Black people who are in terms of denial of health care, jobs, the denial, the violence perpetuated against Black workers, where you allow a billionaire to build a doggone baseball park and real estate development. That is like building an amusement park on an assembly line. This could have devastating impact at the port and also on the remaining Black community. Those 3,000 condominiums are not going to be for the working class, obviously. This is to make Oakland, San Francisco, East Bay. I don't know how many of you have been to the city of San Francisco. It is a lovely city. And for those of you who've been to Pier 39, when you drive down the Embarcadero, the waterfront, I'd like to call your attention to something. In 1934, the port of San Francisco was the #1 port city in the world. And all of that Embarcadero, where you drive down now, heading to the Fisherman's Wharf, all of that was where longshore workers worked. The whole Embarcadero. Now, what do you see when you drive down the Embarcadero? You see restaurants, businesses. The only two piers that have anything remotely to do with shipping, with maritime, is Pier 27, which is a premier passenger vessel terminal for passenger ships, and Pier 35, which is an older version. So this is an attack on longshore workers, Black longshore workers, the most radical Black workers in the United States, if not the world. So that's the reason why the issue of the privatization is right up there with the issue of stopping the police terror. It's right up there, because this action on Juneteenth would not have happened if it were not for ILWU Local 10. Let's talk a little bit about what happened on Juneteenth. I think the most remarkable thing was the turnout from the community. I've been told that there were 25,000 people and 3,000 cars. I have sent out to some of the comrades on this call aerial views of the march. And I'm reminded about something. When those two strikers were killed in 1934 that I mentioned to you, shot in the back, the police were never prosecuted. That is what led to the general strike in San Francisco, where for 4 days the city of San Francisco was paralyzed. That was labor's response to the murder of those two individuals. When I saw that procession, I couldn't help but think about that. One of the most dramatic moments that occurred at that rally, we had a rally that took place at the Port of Oakland. Then once the rally started, we stopped at the Oakland Police Department and we ended at Oscar Grant Plaza in front of City Hall. On the first leg of our mobilization in front of the port, Sister Angela Davis, she did not want to risk. She thought that her immune system would be compromised and she could not make it. But what she did, she appeared in her car, stood up, and a pre-recorded message was played. And it brought tears to my eye, literally. She laid out the history of the ILWU and its struggle against white supremacy, its struggle for the working class, going back to the 1940s. She went all the way up through the anti-apartheid struggle. She talked about the solidarity the ILWU had expressed to the civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was made an honorary member of Local 10 in 1967, just months before his assassination. Dr. King said he didn't feel like a stranger in the house of the ILWU. He also talked about how he and those in the civil rights movement had borrowed the strategy of the sit-ins from workers in the 1937 sit-down strike in Flint, Michigan, the auto workers. But when Angela Davis spoke, she talked about the solidarity actions taken in support of Mumia Abu-Jamal, the anti-apartheid struggle, the Palestinian solidarity struggle. The list was, shutting down for Mumia. It was just so dramatic. And I can send you her remarks. And she was in a sea of workers. It was absolutely astounding. I'll never forget it. And all that I can think of was that the first African-American to be elected president of Local 10, a man by the name of Cleophas Williams, who knew my grandfather and came into the industry in the same year, 1944. In 1971, at the 19th biennial ILWU convention in Honolulu, Cleophas got up and he introduced a resolution calling for justice for Angela Davis, calling for the right for her to receive bail. Angela never forgot that. Never forgot that. So I say Angela was speaking to not a history of days gone by. She was speaking to the living history of the ILWU. You know, we have to say that in our society, and it's a reality, that many of our people are affected by celebrities. Brother Danny Glover spoke right before Angela Davis. He does not want to be compromised. He's got 3 people living with him at home. He wasn't feeling well, but he came and he gave a message from his car over his phone. And when I introduced Danny, I told the crowd that I had known him for over 50 years. I told them how he and I were arrested in 1967 and expelled from San Francisco State summarily before we were reinstated. How we had shut down the campus for 4.5 months for the establishment of Black Studies and the School of Ethnic Studies that stands today. How he has used his celebrity status for humanity. He spoke. When we went to Oscar Grant Plaza, I want to highlight this before I forget. Boots Riley spoke. The director of the film Sorry to Bother You and the musician of fame of the coup. He talked about how the bosses couldn't make any money for 8 hours. because of the shutdown. We had people like Michael Brown Sr., whose son, Michael Brown Jr., was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. He spoke. Cephas Johnson, the uncle of Oscar Grant, spoke. We had young people. We had Trent Willis, Keith Shanklin, Jack Heyman, labor leaders. I reminded the rank and file that if Leo Robinson were alive, he would pose this question. Who didn't speak today on this stage? I said, it's a rhetorical question. I won't make you ponder it. He would tell you, there are no Democrats on this stage. We were told that the lieutenant governor of the state of California was there, but she could not speak on that stage. No politicians. Politicians can't speak for us. No one can speak for the working class like the working class for themselves. The interests of the Democratic Party are not the interest of the working class. And I gave solid examples of that. Politicians who say that they believe in Black Lives Matter, that they stand with us, but yet they take financial contributions from police unions and the Fraternal Order of Police. You can't do both. Democratic politicians who are doing the bidding of a billionaire like John Fisher, who wants to minimize the capacity of the port and limit longshore jobs that African Americans have benefited from for 80 years. You can't say that you support labor and be against Black labor. So I'm trying to sum up for you the dynamics of the day and some of the key things that took place. I'm 72, so I'm sure there's some things that I've missed, but I would suggest that you all go to that website and look. And one of the things, we had these remarkable flyers that were created by young people with the cranes boomed up. And you know, I came out of shelter in place, and so did my wife and partner, Dolores Lemon Thomas. We haven't been coming out. We haven't been going out into the public, but it was no way that I could not be there. I took a calculated risk. I was telling people that I was going to show up in a hazmat suit. Well, I had gloves and masks, multiple gloves and masks, had my arms covered up, took my echinacea and my CBD and went out there. But I have to tell you, it was an extraordinary day, absolutely extraordinary. It was extraordinary not only for Local 10, but for the entire working class. And it was an expression of the leadership of the Black working class. And we have to make it clear to people that the Democratic Party does not speak for us. The reforms that mayors and governors and even CEOs of corporations, if you notice, Target gave its people Juneteenth, Twitter, they're all over the place. Oh, by the way, the governor of New York gave state workers Juneteenth off. That's nice. Also, I understand that Target even raised its minimum wage to $15. That's an important thing that happened. That's going to put pressure on the Walmart and others to raise theirs. But we, who call ourselves revolutionaries, we understand why this is happening. It's because the masses are in the streets. The youth, Black, white, red, brown, are in the streets. They have no jobs to go to. School's out. Revolution is in the air. I'm not saying that it's there, but it's in the air. And we have to be very strategic at this particular moment. I talked about the importance of, when we talk about defunding the police, what we really are talking about is divesting from the police department and investing in much needed community services. That's what we're talking about. Why is it that police budgets go up when all other budgets are cut when it comes to social spending for the class? We have to pose that question. We need to be very strategic, and we also need to be united. Labor and community united. I'm open for questions if anybody has any.
Okay, well, we need to get to our other two panelists.
Hope I left time for them.
Right. That was Bill. No, well, I just want to say thanks,
Thank
Clarence.
you so much.
It's fortunate to be working with someone who's going to be in the future history books as one of the most prominent figures there. So I feel fortunate to know you and be able to work with you like that. I mean, the significance of the Million Worker March in 2004, pointing the way not only for the unions and then, you know, Trumka and International, they can try to ignore the Black leadership of your union, of ILWU and the things that you were setting down for the world, but the rank and file sees it and the world sees it. So, you know, we really want to thank the leadership of your union because it really is historic. I really feel fortunate to be.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to have done this, and we'll be in touch. Please stay safe, stay strong.
All right.
An injury to one is an injury to all. Thank you.
Right. So we're going to go right to GLORIA VERDIEU and Rebecca Jackson. And GLORIA, hold on a second. GLORIA is a writer for the Struggle La Lucha, is with the Socialist Unity Party in Texas and San Diego, and an organizer in the fight to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, Leonard Peltier, and all political prisoners. And so glad to have you here, GLORIA. So we'll let you take it over. And then I also want to introduce, because like I said before, I have a demonstration I have to go to. And so Rebecca Jackson will be taking over the chairing after this. Rebecca Jackson, who recently traveled to Minneapolis, and she'll give a firsthand report on the struggle to abolish police and state repression. She resides in Los Angeles and is an artist and organizer for Socialist Unity Party. And she was also a victim of police brutality and was hospitalized actually after that incident. So first, we're gonna let GLORIA take it over. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Clarence. Thank you, Clarence. So it's just so important. It's really an honor to be speaking on this national webinar with so many exciting speakers, Clarence, Rebecca, John. I want to share some history on the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, and June 19th. Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation January 1st, 1863, which would come into effect only if the Union won the war. It reads, can everybody hear me really clear? Can you hear me clearly? Just say yes. Okay, thumbs up. Okay, and the proclamation reads, on the first day of January, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then thenceforward and forever free. The proclamation initially freed only the enslaved persons in the rebellious Confederate States. Initially, the focus of the war was preserving the Union. The proclamation changed the focus of the war from preserving the Union to freedom for the enslaved. This new focus paved the way for Africans to fight for their freedom. over 200,000 Africans served in the Union Army and Navy. Henry Louis Gates states, "We've all heard the story of the 40 acres and a mule, a promise to the formerly enslaved. We were taught in school that the source of the policy was initiated by Union General William T. Sherman. What most of us don't know is that the idea for the massive redistribution of 400,000 acres of confiscated land owned by Confederates was the result of a discussion that Sherman and the Secretary of War held with 20 leaders of the Black community in Savannah, Georgia, January 1865. 4 days after this meeting, General Sherman issued Special Field Order Number 15, which was approved by President Abraham Lincoln January 16, 1865. Special Order Number 15 stated, "The islands from Charleston south, the abandoned rice fields along the rivers for 30 miles back from the sea, and the country bordering the St. Johns River, Florida, are reserved and set apart for the settlement of the Negroes now made free by the acts of war and the proclamation of the President of the United States." It specified that these new communities, moreover, would be governed entirely by Black people themselves. Each family should have a plot of not more than 40 acres of tillable ground, of which land the military authorities will afford them protection until such time as they can protect themselves or until Congress shall regulate their title. Historian Eric Foner explained, the freedman hastened to take advantage of the order. Baptist minister Ulysses L. Houston led 1,000 Blacks to Skidaway Island, Georgia, where they established a self-governing community with Houston as the Black governor. And by June, 40,000 freed men had been settled on 400,000 acres of Sherman land. Sherman later ordered that the Army lend the new settlers mules, hence the phrase 40 acres and a mule. Well, what happened? In an essay by Mumia Abu-Jamal, The Case for Reparations, he states, by the end of the year, with the war won, another general, Oliver Otis Howard, would tell some 40,000 Blacks that they could not keep the lands allotted to them by Sherman. With President Abraham Lincoln dead, April 1865, the next president, Andrew Johnson, would veto the 40-acre law passed by Congress, and the road to betrayal was chosen. Johnson would order the return of plantations to the former owners of slaves and lands if they pledged loyalty. Decades later, after over half a century had passed, a former slave, Sally Dixon, would remember, "We were told when we got freed we was going to get 40 acres of land and a mule. Instead of that, we didn't get nothing." Being a socialist and a revolutionary, it is not difficult for me to express the implications of Black self-determination by the free Africans. What's difficult is the fact that this turned out to be another broken promise. It was June 19, 1865, that the Union soldiers, led by Major General Gordon Granger, landed at Galveston, Texas, with news that the war had ended and that the enslaved was now free, 2.5 years after the proclamation was issued. One of General Granger's first orders of business was to read to the people of Texas General Order Number 3, which began with, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and free laborer." The reactions to this profound news range from pure shock to immediate jubilation. While many lingered to learn of this new employer to employee relationship, Many left before their efforts were completely off the lips of their former masters, attesting to the varying conditions on the plantations and the realization of freedom. Even with nowhere to go, many left felt that leaving the plantations would be their first grasp of freedom. We must understand that enslaved Africans, whether they were house Negroes, field Negroes, Uncle Tom Negroes, or whatever, what the enslaved had in common was their inherent desire for freedom. June 19th, also known as Juneteenth, is an official state holiday in Texas after having been signed into law on June 13th, 1979. In summary, I'll say this. I went through 12 years of public school, half in the Jim Crow South, Crestview, on Florida's Panhandle, bordering Alabama, and half in Niagara Falls, New York, on the Canadian border. I do not recall having discussions in any of my classes, history or social studies, in my segregated elementary school, on the integrated or in my integrated high schools I attended about the promise which Gates explained was the first systematic attempt to provide a form of reparations to newly freed slaves. Nor do I recall a conversation about June 19, 1865, when the enslaved in Texas was made aware of the Emancipation Proclamation. I do know that in my small hometown of segregated Crestview, we had an annual celebration the last weekend in May called May Day. Black people came from miles to participate. The main street in our segregated community was lined with beautifully decorated floats with homecoming king and queen from our segregated school, fancy cars with the names of local churches and ministries, community leaders, fish fries, barbecues. People would line up outside their homes, all dressed up. Festivities continued throughout the day and night, and award ceremonies and reunions the following day. In Niagara Falls, we had gatherings, family reunions in the summer months where relatives from all around would gather, have barbecues and fish fries, and share stories. Juneteenth, Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, Family Reunion Day are all a part of long traditions in the Black communities across the U.S. that reflect our freedom struggles and our continued determination to reunite with our ancestors here in the U.S. and across the world. It doesn't matter where you live. Racism, police terror, homelessness, unemployment, economic inequity, all products of this capitalist system exist in the United States. After living in California for over 40 years, I recently moved to Texas. Since January 2020, there have been 490 people shot by the police in the US, 38 in Texas. There are 2,620 death row inmates in the US as of January 1st, 2020. Texas has 224. The US has executed 6 inmates in 2020, 2 in Texas, 3 are scheduled. We have to study our history to help us make decisions about our future. Every day, every month, every year, we should stay focused and committed to our purpose to make this world a better place for all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal, Leonard Peltier, and all political prisoners. Abolish the death penalty. Disarm the racist police. Shut down the prison industrial complex. Join an organization. Organize, organize, organize for people's power. Thank you so much for listening. In solidarity.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Very inspiring, as usual, and informative. And I hope we will have some time for questions and answers and things like that. So I'm sure folks want to glean some more of the great knowledge from you and Clarence and then Rebecca. I just wanted to say real quick, and then I'm going to have to skedaddle out of here, and Rebecca's going to take over sharing. Just wanted to give something really quick about this, talk about the, how just a little information on how our ruling class and the rhetoric that they use to say that, you know, they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and they created their own wealth, and how much of a lie that is, because they stole their wealth mainly from slavery. They were able to compile enough cash to create industries and financial institutions to fund, and then to direct those industries. You know, before 1792 and the invention of the cotton gin, which was a higher tech way of processing cotton, before that, the bales of cotton produced was about 378 per year, and a bale is about 500 pounds. And after the cotton gin, by 1800, they were able to produce about 36,000 bales per year. And then by 1860, it went up to 4 million bales per year. So that meant that the African slaves were producing wealth that serviced the world and dominated the economy. You know, we hear a lot about folks saying that they're going to study reparations to see whether it's good or bad and things. And it really kind of gets under my skin when it's a white person. I don't care if it's Bernie Sanders or anybody saying that they feel like they have the right to tell us whether we deserve reparations or not. No. And when you look at the tremendous wealth this came from free labor that went to finance the railroad industry owned by the Vanderbilts, and then to create Standard Oil owned by the Rockefellers, creation of U.S. Steel owned by J.P. Morgan. That money was went into making the Rockefellers, Morgans, and Mellons financial kings, creating the Manhattan Bank. You all know Chase Manhattan Bank, Chemical Bank, all of those. In 1860, by 1868, these entities and a few others had so much wealth that they controlled both the Democratic and Republican parties, and all the policies that came from them that have impoverished us and put us in fear and in terror by the police. So reparations is what we need and what we demand. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Rebecca. And thanks everyone, all the panelists. Thank you for having such a great webinar here.
Thanks, John. And thank you, Clarence, and thank you, Gloria. It's always great to be able to do anything with y'all, even if it's not in person. I'm going to keep this pretty brief. I am just doing kind of a report on what happened in Minneapolis, my experience there, and how we can continue to support that struggle in real time. I'm actually going to go ahead and share some photos. So you don't have to look at me the whole time. So I had the privilege of being able to go to Minneapolis to experience the protest, kind of document, talk to people, and take pictures. It was, I felt it was kind of a historical moment, and to be able to go there, represent the party, and just participate and have a real ground level view of what's going on, instead of course, the corrupted news that usually gets reported. There was, just before getting there was a huge amount of solidarity and support, fundraising, people donating whatever they could to get us there and be able to keep us there. So there was a huge amount of energy from all over the country, all over the world, of people supporting us just being able to get there, people chipping in, and just looking at the pictures, keeping up on social media. I just want to recognize that it was a huge privilege to be able to be there, to be able-bodied, to be able to have the film equipment to go organize. And so one of the things I was thinking about is just continuing to make ways in which people can continue to support the protesters on the ground, whatever their abilities, access, and wherever they are at in the world, but to continue to be able to support these revolutionary struggles in ways through just education, amplifying, and making sure that we are supporting the people of Minneapolis. The biggest thing that I noticed there that I've been wanting to talk about is the need for organized socialist support. This was an absolutely grassroots youth movement, completely organic. There was no sort of formal organizing. There was no sort of even formal chapter of Black Lives Matter there. And so these were truly mostly youth who were just completely fed up. They took over the streets and they were making their demands known. The entire city, it was really amazing. Pretty much the entire city was in total support of the uprisings. People came out. If they couldn't march, they were standing in their yards with signs. Little kids, people with babies standing out, supporting the protesters. The whole community came together at the memorial. You could have anything you needed. They were providing free cooked meals when you were there. They were providing food for you to take home, diapers, cleaning supplies, paper towels, toilet paper, anything you needed to survive. You could go to the George Floyd Memorial and access that. So once again, it was a true testament of absolutely no support from any sort of government, no support from any sort of Democrats, 100% community initiated, people taking donations, bringing the things they can, just chipping in any way that they can, and completely police free. There was, even in spite of mass interference from the police, from the KKK, from white supremacists, everybody still was really thriving. It couldn't be stopped. The first night we were there was KKK following protesters. The National Guard came in and tried to kettle us, fully armed, tanks, armored vehicles. We're chasing these kids around the city. So to still have that amount of really, truly grassroots organization is a huge testament to the power of what's going on there. One of the biggest things about the biggest successes that I want to talk about is, of course, the fact that Minneapolis has voted to abolish their police. And so I think the most important lesson we can learn from them is to never stop pushing for complete abolishment. I think we are seeing now in these recent murders, continued brutality, the brutality at the protest of police. Talking about defunding them is doing nothing but pissing them off and thinking that this is really a war and that they're going to continue to come for us. So the biggest thing and the lesson I want us to take away from Minneapolis is abolish the police. The demand is abolish the police. In the police. Minneapolis also proved we don't need police. They had their own police, their own security at the George Floyd Memorial the entire time. It was completely peaceful, completely organized when you were there. There were no problems. So once again, we already have examples of how community control of the police works. Beyond abolishing, the most important thing is disarm. So taking away money to a bunch of Nazi murderous psychopaths is not going to do anything. They still have their guns. So once again, the biggest thing, abolish, disarm, community control of the police. Once again, just proving that the only way that we can really hope for change is through mass socialist organization and intervention, a true toppling of capitalism. I think Minneapolis, this is an amazing example of socialism in action, taking over these few blocks, having their own food, having all of their own resources, completely providing for their community, healthcare there, first aid bus with free healthcare, and abolishing the police. So one of the things I want to really continue to promote is getting socialists, getting members of Socialist Unity Party in Minneapolis there, hopefully to be able to kind of set up a foundation there, set up a center, and continue to do work, because the spirit of revolution is strong, it's alive, it's unstoppable. And now with a little bit of education, some books, some training, some understanding of how to organize socialist revolution, this is an amazing starting ground for a real systemic change through socialism. Just going through a few more of these pictures. As you can see, this is at the memorial. That's in the center. This was an evening, rain or shine. It was pouring rain. People stood out there. It was amazingly inspiring. It was a huge privilege to be able to be there, to share space with the people of Minneapolis. And to really prove that, for one, yes, we need to burn shit down. before they're going to do anything. For 2, we can survive without police. And that 3, the only way forward is to completely abolish capitalism. So that's pretty much, and I'm happy to answer any more questions that we can specifically about what was happening in Minneapolis. A couple of things I would also just like to mention is next Sunday, there's also going to be another webinar on the Stonewall Rebellion. So please check your email and check the Facebook to get more information on that and sign up, because these webinars are kind of the best way for us to continue to connect and build the movement, and also just learn things. Like, there's so much I always learn whenever I get to check in with the comrades from all over. So it's kind of an even better way sometimes than our local things, because we get access to people everywhere. And let's see, what other things? There's also, if you are based in Los Angeles, there is going to be a protest right now, basically. It's starting around 2 p.m. So you probably want to get ready and head there. There was a young man murdered when he was at work, executed by the LA Sheriff's Department. It has happened quite too often. So please come there if you can. That's going to be at the corner of Figueroa and Redondo in Gardenia, where the young man was murdered while he was on, once again, at work as a security guard, executed by the LA Sheriff. So it's 420 West Redondo Beach Boulevard, Gardenia 90248. Thanks. Yes, absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you so